Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story, profiles the actor who was paralyzed from a horse riding accident and found a new purpose in life. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Christopher Reeve was an unknown off-Broadway actor when he was cast in his mid-20s as Superman for the 1978 blockbuster and its 3 sequels. He took on more varied roles in films such as Somewhere in Time, Death Trap, and Anna Karenina. At age 42, he was thrown from a horse and paralyzed from the neck down. For the remaining 10 years of his life, he dedicated himself to raising funds and awareness towards scientific solutions and other support for people with disabilities. Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story, gives us a deeper insight into his life and the inspiration he gave to others. The film was made with the family archives opened up by his 3 children, Matthew, Alexandra, and Will. Other prominent figures in the film include Reeve's wife, Dana, and his close friend, Robin Williams. The documentary Superman was produced independently. It premiered at Sundance and was bought by Warner Brothers, home to the DC Comics franchise. The film is getting one of the widest theatrical releases of any documentary in recent years. The directors are Bonhôte and Peter Ettedgui. They previously collaborated on a documentary about the controversial fashion designer Alexander McQueen, who died by suicide. They also made the Emmy-winning Netflix documentary Rising Phoenix about the Paralympics. Ian is a co-founder of the London company Misfits Entertainment that produced The Contestant, featured on our episode 184. I sat down with Ian and Peter in New York in September. I started by asking if their film on the Paralympics had set the stage for taking on the subject of Christopher Reeve. Ian goes first.
I think both of our previous films, McQueen and Rising Phoenix, help us in a way be prepared for the film, and I think it helped us convincing the 3 children that actually we were the right people to do the film. I think they could see in our work that there was the biopical elements as well as an understanding of the difficulties and the struggle of people with disability face. And because obviously Rising Phoenix is about the sporting element of it and success through sport and the Paralympic movement, but there's always in every person living with a disability, there's a sort of societal struggle, a daily struggle that actually a lot of people share.
I would also say that we had this wonderful interview with one of the athletes from Burundi, who we asked, the question was something along the lines of, what is it like to participate in the Paralympics? And he sort of said, have you seen Avengers Assemble? It's like that, because we've all had to overcome huge adversity. We come together, and what we do is we try to save the world. And I think that, coupled with the fact that when going through all of the archive, we found Christopher introducing the 96 Paralympics in Atlanta. These things sort of they definitely prepared the way for this film.
So how did the project originate? Was the family looking for filmmakers, or did you approach the family?
No. What happened is it was pure serendipity, actually. We have an archive producer. Well, he's a producer in his own right, and he had reached out. His name's Daniel Kilroy. He had reached out to Matthew Reeve to find out what was happening with the family archives. And what, in fact, was happening with the family archives was that the 3 Reeve kids were in the process of selling, or had just sold, their parents' house, and just had boxes and boxes full of archives, some of which they'd sort of been sifting through, and deciding that it was time to do something. They'd all reached a point in their lives where they felt much more sort of secure. Will had grown up. He was in his early 30s, and so they felt like they were set in life and ready to kind of go back to the story of Christopher and Dana. And so Daniel reached out to them. They sort of said, well, we're interested, but who do you think would be the filmmaking team? And Daniel got in touch with Passion Pictures, with whom we'd made Rising Phoenix, and they came to us and said, would you be at all interested in doing something about Christopher Reeve? And it didn't take very long for us to say, absolutely.
I want to ask you about like coming from Alexander McQueen to Christopher Reeve. Alexander McQueen kind of exemplifies the avant-garde. Christopher Reeve, in a way, exemplifies a kind of American mainstream. What do you see as the through line or the difference between those two figures? Concentrating on them.
I think the work that they created became iconograph, became like culturally extremely relevant. Even if you come from the avant-garde, obviously McQueen seeped into the mainstream. He from bringing a label from being the bad boy of British fashion onto, becoming one of the mainstream brand that everybody knows about and taking over other houses. And I mean, as filmmaker, you want a challenge. We were not just looking for another story of an avant-garde artist of some sorts. That's not the way we operate. We're more interested in seeing if emotionally the story has enough depth and has enough sort of twists and turns to create, almost an emotional structure and journey. So basically, for us, it's mostly that Chris's life and his work were such a contrast that we could just really, really, get our teeth into trying to create that structure with it. So I think it's more about, because actually it was a challenge and they're very, very radically different, and we were not making something. We would not really be interested in doing something about another fashion designer, to tell you the truth.
I think both of them in their own ways had to overcome trauma in their lives. And Christopher's on the surface looks much, much more extreme, but with McQueen, it was mental health issues that stemmed from childhood abuse. We always felt that was like a time bomb in his life that ultimately led to his suicide. And suicide, I think, we found it very, very painful and difficult to deal with the tragedy of McQueen's life.
Both contemplated.
Yeah.
Chris as well.
Chris starts with contemplating suicide, but his story is much less nihilistic because he finds a new reason to live and a purpose, and he sort of, so there are different kinds of story. One is quite nihilistic, and the other, in spite of the fact that it's tragic, it's sort of, to me, it's sort of like really has a purpose to it, and and that's a lovely thing to do.
And is it really tragic? Because, as Laurie says in the film, they always knew that at some point Chris was gonna, the body was gonna shut down. So it was more about when it happened than, the sort of drastic measure that Alexander McQueen took. And I think that's why, in a way, for us as filmmakers as well, despite they are dark moment, it's a lot lighter and hopeful story, the Christopher Reeve story, because as Peter pointed out, he hopefully found a purpose, but even his death still gave a purpose to loads of people. People wanted to carry on with the legacy, when in McQueen, the legacy has been a bit tarnished, and there's a lot of, blaming of each other within the close, allies, friends and family. So, and that is something that both Peter and I had to navigate, knowing these people were, again, making this film, the kids, but the friends that Chris had, the extended family, they all wanted to talk to us. We had to find schedule, but everyone was extremely positive about having a conversation about him, because he just touched them, he just inspired them, which was a very different journey on McQueen.
Yeah. It was a conspiracy of silence around McQueen, which made it so difficult for us. Very rewarding ultimately to have enough material to actually have a film.
Well, in the case of Christopher Reeve, two of the key figures of his life, Robin Williams, one of his best friends, and his wife Dana, are no longer here for you to be able to interview. Can you talk about how you build up their presence in the film without being able to interview them?
Same as Chris, in a way. In a sense, our main protagonist is not with us, and actually, the triumvirate of protagonists of the film is not part of the film. But we never, I don't think. Not to say we will never make a film about people which are alive, because in Rising Phoenix we did. But we're not really worried about it, because you find archive, if you work on someone where you have a vast amount of archive, like we had, even on McQueen, even if we didn't have vast about personal archive, there were still interviews with him out there, there's his shows, so there was visuals element that could create our rushes to be able to structure the story.
I mean, the trick for us with this was everyone knows that Chris and Robin died, but actually a large part of the audience doesn't know that Dana died. And it's not that we wanted it to be a surprise, but it was that we kind of didn't want to blow the ending. We wanted to make Dana sufficiently present in the story that it would come as a shock, a kind of like a hammer blow of fate when she does die. And that seems to happen with a lot of the audience, even though, for example, Will might be talking about his mother in the past tense. There's still the impression, because she's in so much of the archive and she's so radiant in it. I mean, her smile, even, we were at a screening last night, and her smile just sort of, what does Will say about it, like it's being like wrapped up by the sun or something? And it really is like that. So she feels very present and alive in the narrative.
And would you agree as well, actually, which is discussing is a very good question, that we start the film and people will come to this film thinking they're coming to see a Christopher Reeve story. But seeing that after the accident, Dana had to step in so much. And as Will says, she had to become the father, she was the mother, she had to become the carer. Because she took on so many roles within the family, almost it's like you start with one story and people are assembling around him for him to carry on and for all of them to carry on. And that's why not treating her passing would have been almost, we felt like we haven't finished the story. We might have started with Chris, but we didn't finish with Chris's death.
Right.
Dana is just carrying on the legacy, and then the children. And I think it became apparent to us. And almost we reworked the beginning a bit of the film to make sure that we start with the children and we finish with the children, because actually the film is about love, family, and legacy.
I want to ask you about the overall structure, because there's two sections to this life. There's his major on-screen life in Superman and other films, and a kind of storied Hollywood experience that he had, and then there's this other chapter of his life that is struggling to grapple with a spinal cord injury. How did you figure out how to weave these two narrative lines together?
I would love to be able to say, oh God, it's all a brilliant idea. But the fact is that Still Me, Chris's absolutely beautiful memoir, does do something quite similar. It starts sort of with the accident, and in a very literary way, he then folds in his story before the accident. And I think we immediately and very strongly felt that that was the way to go with the film, and we had to just find a cinematic equivalent of doing that. I think what is important to say, and this isn't in the book, because the book was written, a couple of years after the accident, so Chris hadn't really lived the full story yet. But there's a lovely shape to his life post-accident. You start with despair and suicidal thoughts. You progress to finding a reason to live, which was really his wife, and you're still you, and we love you, and his family. And then it progresses to him finding a true purpose to his life, and a kind of a mission. And that's a wonderful journey to take an audience on, I think. A very positive and uplifting journey. And what he achieves during that journey is just so remarkable. So there are setbacks and obstacles, but it has a natural filmic shape to it, which really appealed to us, because the hardest thing about doing any kind of biography is that there's that danger of falling into the episodic cradle to grave kind of structure. And we really didn't want to do that.
Would you say as well, that's, despite we got inspired by the book, we had a bit the instinct to do that before being so in-depth, because Matt, Al, and Will really didn't want a cradle to grave story. They really
The three children.
yeah,
Yeah, I think Matthew
the
particularly, because
Yeah.
Matthew's a filmmaker in his own right, and he absolutely saw those traps as well.
And I think they were really worried as well about how, and we were worried. You don't want a film of two halves, you know, in the wheelchair and before standing and all successful. And I think if I'm going to be honest, and we're on a honest podcast as well, we were both very worried that when you look at the footage of Chris in the wheelchair, it's very static. And there are a lot of viewers, and we've seen that with the success or the medium success of Rising Phoenix. There's still a lot of people, sadly, in our society, which have got issues with topic and disability. You know, if you've got body differences, if you're missing a limb, people are still a bit. And I think it's not. I won't blame people. I'll say it's a lack of awareness, like everything else. You know, our society needs to see things, an example of people to understand and just, you know, feel comfortable with. And I think we were worried about that we would have like the first half of you got, you know, even if, as Peter said it really eloquently this morning, you have an amazing structure already, you know, from nowhere to the massive success to the crash of his career in a way within the pre-accident.
That's true, yes, so there is a shape in the pre.
There's a shape, and that's what helped us. We could see not quite similarities, because I think it goes like this, up and down in the Superman Able era, and it keeps on going up and up and up in the era where he was trapped by the wheelchair. But there is similarities which help us finding segues to connect the tissues of the two sections. And it's the magic of nonfiction. And I think if we're here to talk about that, is that you're editing. And our editor, Otto Bonham, and I hate saying that because every time I say Otto Bonham, he receives another 40 calls to give him a job. And then we have to go even further down on our knees for him to consider working with us, miserable mortals. No, joke aside, he's an amazing editor. And I think his first film was actually Rising Phoenix. I think the three of us have found an amazing way to collaborate. We love each other. We have similar, you know, views, and it's quite fantastic. But my point is, the 6 months more or less we spent in the edit, we could really massage the different section, and it, you know, it's magical what we do. You know, fiction people, they think they're the kings of everything because they've got the script to rely on, but that's 5-10 years of, you know, of work. We have those 6 months of vast array of material. Sometimes what we shot, it's magical for that nonfiction.
I want to ask about pacing emotion in the film. I once interviewed a filmmaker who said that, you know, on screen you can have someone cry once in a documentary, and you know, if you try to do that too many more times, you're going to be asking too much. Whether someone's crying,
with that, I'd like to have a conversation with that person. Sorry.
You know, there are a lot of. I mean, that's the difference between someone crying in an interview and the audience crying from what's happening in the story. There are a lot of big emotional moments in this film. Is that something you know had to pace out in a way?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing to say is we kind of feel that a film is like, not to be too cold about it, but it's like an empathy machine. You know, we love taking audiences on, and ourselves on, emotional journeys in making films. And with this film, you know, particularly starting with the accident, it means that the potential for feeling loss, kind of grief over a life, as Christopher says, when I was used to be whole, that's there from the beginning. So you're taking the audience through a veil of tears right from the get-go. I think for us, what was not to shy away from that, and not to say, oh no, we can't have more emotion now. Never would we do that. But what we try to do is we try to find different energies and different emotional qualities. So humour is very important, and almost, you know, the tears and sometimes the sobs that we hear when people are watching this film, which we share ourselves, almost something that we kind of expect. There were a lot of tears shed in the edit. But what is so rewarding is to hear the laughter and to hear those moments where we sort of like, We build the pressure up, we build the emotion, but then we sort of like can uncork it and go back to New York in 1973, for example, and Chris and Robin meeting at Juilliard, and that has a totally different energy, and I think that's always I mean, we kind of almost draw the story out in a kind of emotional graph, so we know what you can't do is layer more tears on top of more tears. You have to have something between those two sets of tears. I feel terrible talking like this, but yes, you do. Because you do have to. Otherwise, it just becomes too much for an audience, I think.
And our motto, emotion over information. I mean, we have huge amount of respect for every type of documentary, non-fiction filmmaking, and literally we love it. But ours tends to be driven by emotion. So information, if it lets you dry just for the sake of it, we try to either work it out within an emotional beat or leave it all to the side. Did the audience really need to know that? And, Peter's already said it, but the only thing I would say is just, I truly believe, especially in the difficult time of our industry, audiences come to either the cinema or they watch movie to feel things. If you like horror films, is this, the fear, the scare. If you go to a comedy, you just want to have a good laugh. So I think with this story, we identify within it all the element of humor, all the element of sadness, and all the element of, some people might say that we're a bit cheesy from time to time. I'll take it, of hope and inspiration. And I do believe that right now in our society, a little bit of hope and a little bit of, feeling that the world is not completely bleak can help. And so I think that's what Peter and I really spend a lot of time, and Otto, for sure. We like to have almost on our boards, on the walls, all the sort of the human emotions. And how can you actually translate them in your film? Sometimes you can't, we haven't made, an horror documentary. Maybe we might, but you see what I mean? It's just about, maybe we just want to make sure that people go through this very big journey. And you know what? It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but for us, it's just that's why, some people might ask you, why are you working together? What bonds you, or what makes you tick and click? He's super smart. So every time I work with Peter, you just, he comes, you just discover always a lot of great stuff, and I hope he says the same, but he's staying silent, sorry guys, so I don't know what he's going to say. No, but it's just that we share a very strong desire to make people feel, because we want to feel it. You are the first audience. If you don't know exactly what is really you looking for in films yourself, how can you go and make it? But if you have a very strong understanding of how you tick, what makes you tick and what makes you move, and again, that's why we did Christopher Reeve Story. Do you see what I mean? We spent almost 3 to 4 years in between Rising Phoenix and Christopher Reeve. We don't take on everything. Do you see what I mean? Some people might say, oh yeah, that's a bit of a celebrity film and all the rest of it. No, we don't. It's just, it was Christopher Reeve Story. You would have given us another story which had that highs and lows, we would have been the first one to say yes.
Well, I'm curious what Christopher Reeve meant to either of you before taking on this project.
Well, for me, I mean, I remember going to the Dominion Theatre in London in 1978. It must have been the first weekend of Superman. I was just dying to see it. I was maybe 13, 14. And seeing this guy who incarnated my comic book idol from my misspent childhood was just, I just remember the sugar rush of that. And then sort of always being interested in both the sequels to the films, which, as Christopher says, progressively got worse, but also in other parts that he played. Death Trap, but I do remember seeing Death Trap and thinking the real thrill of seeing him do something so utterly different. And then, I must have been 95. I was kind of like, kind of getting on for 30, and reading about the accident and having this childhood hero reading about what had happened to him, and then learning that he was actually determining to walk again. I mean, a lot of those headlines that we see in the film, I remember them. And just like so many other people, being sort of entranced by the story of how he had taken great adversity and turned it into advocacy and activism, and that just seemed so inspiring to me at the time. And then just the feeling just so down on the day that I heard that he died. So kind of like, that was my perspective, and it's probably the same as millions of other people. But then when you have a chance to be invited into a life beyond those basic facts and feelings, and investigate it, I think it was sort of like, well, I want to go back there, and I want to sort of like understand who he was and what he became, and that was very much the sort of the impetus. At the same time, I have to say that when we first talked about it, Ian just sort of like grabbed hold of me and said, we're going to make the ultimate superhero story set in the real world. And that, just as a sort of like basic pitch, that was sort of like beyond Christopher Reeve, but it was sort of like really quite a thrilling thought.
And from telling you that, I come from a completely different angle. I was hardly born when the first film came out. And
he doesn't look it, but he's actually a lot younger than me.
And again, I think it's obvious with my accent. I am not American, let alone British, though spending a long time. So he was an Anglo-Saxon icon. But the superhero and Superman films transcended just the US or England or any English-speaking country. So I did watch the film. I do believe I might have seen the number 3 in the cinema, but I'm not even quite remember. But what I know is over my career, and all of my career has been in English-speaking language, I consider myself a cultural mercenary. I take a stand slightly out, because it is not my culture originally. So I have a sort of slightly step back. And I know that sometimes people might say, are you exactly the right person to do the story? Because actually maybe culturally you might be different, and if you do something about a great woman, I am a man, cisgender man. But the advantage for that story is that I knew the impact of Superman on the world. I knew that if you go to a deep down village in Germany, people like it. Italy, people wear T-shirt with a Superman icon on it, from the depth of Vietnam all the way in Africa, anywhere. And that is very, very tempted as a filmmaker when you try to make stories which are universal. Then when you look, as Peter eloquently said, you look at his personal story and you have all those universal themes of love, family, struggle, despair, that all of us humans share. It's just too exciting. So, sorry to say, it wasn't as a fan I came to it. Actually, I'm a Star Wars fan over this period of time.
He's more Darth Vader in his dress sense.
I will even tell you, I thought it was a great challenge to, how do you make something, one guy that wears underpants over these tights look cool? And I think that's what we really liked with our, with our imagery, our CGI imagery we create, is, it's just challenges them, and that's why it's really interesting. But the emotion of his story was beyond everything. So I will happily use all of my creativity to do it justice.
So, someone says in the film that the movie industry is not a disability-friendly place. You've now worked on 2 films focused on disabilities. I wonder what you've come to learn about access, inclusivity, all those things that people who don't live with a disability take for granted.
On a very simple level, because we on Rising Phoenix, we wanted to make sure that a large proportion of our team were people with disabilities. And so that then gets you into the thing of, well, we have to have an office that is accessible. And finding an office that was accessible in London was a huge challenge. And then when Misfits, Ian and Andy's company, moved to needed a new office. Again, a huge challenge to find somewhere that had lifts, that had accessible toilets. So, I mean, even on the most basic level as that, Ella Beaumont, who is paraplegic and lives outside London, her struggles just getting into the office, we learned so much about the infrastructure and how inaccessible it very often is in the UK. Because there were days where she really struggled to get on a train and get into town. And obviously, she worked from home for a fair bit. But you also want your people around you to be able to talk and discuss and brainstorm and sift through archive together. So just those little things are very challenging. I think on another level, we are both people who we don't yet have any disabilities. I mean, I'm short-sighted, but that's it. And one thing that Christopher said that really stayed with both of us is, disability is the one minority which anyone can become part of in a second, as happened with him. And I think it's that's one thing which I think really speaks to us is that possibility in our own lives, in the lives of our loved ones, in the lives of just people that you kind of meet randomly, and building bridges between people who don't suffer from disability and people who do has become something of a small thread of mission in our lives. Because as Ian was saying before, I mean, I remember talking to somebody when we started working on Rising Phoenix, and someone who was a huge fan of McQueen, saying, "So what are you going to do next?" And I said, "We're going to make a film about the Paralympics." And he kind of almost recoiled and said, "Why on earth would you want to do that?" And that was my first sort of like very visceral indication of what kinds of prejudice, and maybe even not prejudice, but just emotional response to people with disabilities we were coming up against. So we've wanted to chip away at that, and I think actually, I know I'm far away from the question now, but I think that was one of the things that really appealed to us about this story, and the way that Chris built that bridge.
People don't understand exactly what disability. People see it as employing someone with a disability. People see it as, it could slow down the workflow and everything like this. What you asked us, your question was, what did you learn on Rising Phoenix and working with people with disability? Is you have huge amount to gain. If you actually run a company, bringing anyone that has a slightly much bigger struggle than looking at what you're going to wear in the morning and, oh shit, I missed my train, or all the rest of it. When there's so much shit to do to even get ready in the morning, then you start getting your shit together, and then you start being a lot more, So I would even say it's extremely stupid from a managerial point of view to overlook people, great professionals who live with a disability, because you will teach a younger staff or even yourself to raise the bar, the questioning, to ask yourself the right question. Peter said about making the office accessible, but I would say even for the motivation, for understanding what life and how fragile life can be. And another point of view, Misfits is a very, very varied group of people from all walks of life, from different origin, from different gender, from different, a bit of the team. And we stand by that, because we don't stand by that because someone says it's good to do. We stand by that because that teaches me. I'm 47. I need to learn more. I need to be better. I make mistake and then I raise my hand and I apologize. But, thanks to COVID, we're not all the time all in the office, and that allowed us to actually work with people which have got very, very bad cerebral palsy. And if you know what cerebral palsy is, if you have got too much sound in an office or bang or anything like this, that can be shocking. So you can actually have people coming into the office when the office is less busy. So that's what you have to do. But that's called management. You have to manage people about how people work with each other, how they interact with each other. So I think it's almost more of a level of me understanding things and applying that to my workforce around me. Because if you run a company, we make great films, but the industry will only survive if you've got great companies to be able to make the great film. I put a lot of value in making a great company.
Clearly, there's a lot of learnings that came through in small and big ways making this film. But, when you think about this project now about to be released more widely into the world within a matter of a few days from the time we're speaking, what is the biggest thing that you take away from this project?
Trying to actually think what I felt at the end of the premiere screening that we had last night. I think it's something that Ian has already touched on, that is so true, that we all have to confront loss. We will all have to confront some form of illness or disability in our lives. And I think that seeing how this particular family took on the challenges that were posed by the injuries Chris sustained after his accident, not everyone can be Superman and know what it is to be a massive star on screen, but everyone is going to know the sort of some of the emotions and difficulties that he went through after his injury, after his accident. And I think it becomes a very universal story in that sense, and a story about how a family sustains and survives and thrives beyond the death of the parents, in a way. That's what I take away from it, at least.
And we're going to complete each other in the sense that I totally agree with Peter. And then on the level of having made a new film and partnering with actually a film studio, Warner, which was not involved at the beginning. We made the film independently, and they came and saw it at Sundance. A lot of other streamers, distributors saw it at Sundance, and some great people, and people liked it and they wanted to acquire it. But what we're going through right now is seeing if you have a partner, for whatever reason, they might be ulterior motive, want to push a piece of filmmaking and want people to experience it in the best possible way, they are talking about putting it in the cinema and properly. And I think a lot of us within the documentary community, we're almost like, oh, thank you so much. We're going to have 3 screens there or 5 screens there. And
for 4 days.
For 4 days. And you know what? Sometimes that's all
We'll
get.
take it.
We'll take
exactly.
it. We made the contestant, and, he went on a streamer, and we're fighting. We're going to have a theatrical in England. Not making any money, just to make sure there is that. But with this film, we are lucky that the universal story, potentially the knowledge of Christopher Reeve, and the desire to be seen in a lot of countries, they are going to do a proper, theatrical. And you know what? Yesterday again showed me, 500-600 people who would go through that emotional sharing experience. It's magical. And I know, and again, it's not a cry for whatever, but it is special and it is great. And you don't have your phone to get distracted. You don't have the washing machine downstairs. You don't want someone who say, Dad, can I have some chocolate? Or can you pause? I'm going to the loo.
You're not multi-screening.
You're not multi-screening. And it's just special. That's why we do it. And that's why all my colleagues and all the people, I admire and I adore in our industry do it. And we are blessed and lucky to have it. We don't know what's going to happen, if people are going to come and do that. You never know. But they are doing quite a lot for it. And, we're going on the ride. We just, it might never happen again, So we're just enjoying that. And that's what, having made this film, allowing us to do that and potentially seeing it in the big screen in France, Germany, all over Latin America, because we've seen, people in Brazil love him, people in Mexico, and suddenly you're just like, oh, wow, we can cross-border culturally. We could have loads of people from all over the world, from all walks of life, from all different nationalities, cultures, embracing it at the same time. It's just, that's a thrill. I'm still buzzing about it.
I want to thank Ian Bonhôte and Peter Ettedgui for speaking with me. Their film Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story, is playing widely in theaters. We have a newsletter called Doc Voices, now overseen by Bella Racklin. You can find it by searching on Substack for Pure Nonfiction. If you want to advertise to our 40,000 readers, send an email to listen@purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nahausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.